Hello, my name is Elise. Welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a video showing a technique where you paint with Distress Oxide inks. Here is the completed card for today. Let's take a look at the supplies. So I have got all of my supplies laid out here. My black cardstock is Lawn Fawn black cardstock. I've got a paintbrush, some Versamark. Here is my stamp sets, the Hero Arts Joy Stamp and Cut, and the Hero Arts Christmas Lights. I've got my Distress Oxides here, picked raspberry, carved pumpkin, squeezed lemonade, twisted citron, broken china, and wilted violet. Look at that cardstock. That is a Zen brush there. I think it's a number 2. I've also got my embossing magic powder bag and the Hero Arts white embossing powder because I will be embossing on this card to make a well for my painting. I feel like that for me is the easiest way to watercolor. So now that we've taken a look at the supplies, let's get into making the card. So I've got my background stamp here, just sticking it into my MISTI. I'll be using the embossing powder bag to get off any static. Using my sleeve to really rub in that Versamark and then taking that white embossing powder onto the black cardstock. I've got all of that stamped out, so now I just need to heat set it. I know that this is sped up really quickly, but it took me a while to do all of the painting, and so I wanted this to go by quickly and not have you sit here for an hour watching me watercolor. So now that I've got that set, I'm just wiping off any additional of that powder dust, putting down the colors, and then I've got off screen a little cup with water in it to use to pick up the inks to use as paint. And as I'm going through and doing this, I am selecting totally and completely random little lights to paint. No rhyme or reason. I just don't want two of the same to end up directly next to each other, and that's the only kind of rule that I set for myself. I will say that some of these show up quite a bit lighter. The yellow and the orange particularly are very light. If I had had the time, I probably would have gone back and painted a second layer for those specifically, because as it's wet is the most vibrant it's really going to be. As it dries, it kind of dries back a little bit. When I was making this card, I knew I wanted it to be a rainbow, and I could have used regular watercolors, but I think it's fun to stretch your supplies a little bit and use your stamps or your ink pad, in a way that maybe you wouldn't have before. So just going in and filling in, trying to find them all in after I finish this project completely. And you might be able to spot it in the final pictures. There is one little light bulb that did not get painted. Kind of bothers me, but and this is something I say a lot in my videos. People don't realize the little imperfections when you send them a card. They just appreciate the fact that you made them a card. So now that all of that painting is done, just taking the sentiment, the big joy from that stamp and cut bundle. Those are great. The die and the stamps come together on those Hero Art sets, which I really appreciate. And they're usually at a really good price point because there aren't too many dies. Like in this case, there was just one die. So just making sure that that small sub-sentiment is lined up properly. And I am going to use the Twisted Citron color from the Distress Oxide line to do my stamping. The Oxide inks stay wet long enough that you can heat emboss on top of them, which is what my plan is for today. And I used the green shade. I specifically made this card thinking that it was a holiday card that was a little bit more masculine. I struggle sometimes sending, for example, my 30-year-old brother a card with critters on it. And so this I knew was a card that I could send to a gentleman in my life and he wouldn't think that it was too silly and would probably appreciate this. So I think that this will be going to one of my brothers. So I've got the small Peace, Love, and then the big Joy. And I'm going to use clear embossing powder on that because I don't want to take away from the color. I'm just trying to add a little bit of shine to it so that it stands out amongst all of the bright lights. So just scooping that powder on using a little, well, it's like little triangle bead trays. They're plastic. I buy them off Amazon in like a 20 pack. I'll have them linked down below. And just going ahead and heat setting the small subset Sentiment and the larger Joy. I've now die cut out that Joy. It cuts out perfectly with no margin. And then I've cut out with my trimmer the Peace, Love, End. I have also cut down, or I'm about to show you, I'm about to cut down my panel here just a little bit so I have a margin around it and you can see the white cardstock through it. So just going ahead and cutting that down a little bit off, I think almost every side is what I ended up doing. Especially off that side that I'm about to cut now, because that's where the edge of the stamp was and it didn't quite stamp all the way through, if that makes sense. The edge of those red rubber stamps on the Misty don't get the edges of the corners perfectly. So you end up with a little bit of white space when you stamp down on those. So I wanted to make sure I got rid of that. So now I've got my card base. It's a Nina 110 pound cardstock base. And I've got a piece of fun foam there and some Gina K Connect glue just to glue down my watercolored panel onto my card base here. I've started to use liquid adhesive for this because it's just precise. It buys me just a little bit of time to wiggle my project around and make sure everything's straight. That's something that I struggle with, is making sure that my projects are always straight so that the liquid glue has become helpful. I'm almost out on this bottle. I need to get a second bottle. This has by far been my favorite liquid adhesive that I've used so far. So just grabbing my card base and sticking this down. Like I said, there's going to be a little bit of white space margin around the card, which is often how I like my cards to be. So just pressing that down and then bringing over my Sentiment, that Joy word, not forgetting the little dot on the J. Although this is one where if you didn't have it, I don't think it would be horrible. Trying to space it out and see where I want things. Again, using that liquid glue just to buy me a little bit of time to get it down straight. Gluing that down, and then I can glue down my Joy. I liked that Peace, Love, and Sentiment because it kind of fits perfectly on top of that Joy and doesn't distract from that nice larger Sentiment. So if you can see my my one little light that isn't colored, it's right above the white Sentiment strip. So when I move my hand, you'll probably be able to see it. It's hard when you're in a rush and getting it all done to sometimes see that you've forgotten one. So I've got the Joy, added the glue, and now I'm going to put it down on my project. I had left, I globbed a little bit of glue off my mat, so got to get that done. And I did glue down the little dot on the J, and that is the finished card. It's pretty simple. The only time-consuming part is really painting the Oxide. Thank you for watching this video. Click subscribe if you want to see more from me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.